David Edward and William Lazarus discuss comparative religion for dummies.
Bill, how are you?
I am fine, David. And how are you doing today?
I'm very good. Now, Bill, I'm in Florida. Where are you?
I'm in Florida also. I'm just north of Daytona Beach in Ormond Beach.
Wow, I'm in Ocala, so I could get to you.
You're
in
not
90
that far
minutes.
away. We've been to Ocala many times. It's
Yes.
near Lady Lake, and we had friends in Lady Lake.
Yes, beautiful horse country and all that. So yeah, that's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Well, I admire you even more because not only have you written a lot of great books, but you've chosen a great place to live.
It's called the land of the Lotus Eaters.
Well, and you would know about Lotus Eaters because you write fiction books and nonfiction books, but they have a very specific slant, don't they?
Yeah, I do a lot with religious history, and I got interested in religious history as a child, and I've never lost it.
That's fascinating. Now, we were talking, and I was trying to get in my head all the different books you have out, and I simply couldn't do it. So I said I would have you explain kind of maybe what your most recent couple books were. And you've also written a For Dummies book. I'm going to be interested in talking about that experience, and I guess you had to pitch it to him and go through go through an agent.
I went through that's an agent. I
Yeah.
had an agent. He's unfortunately retired. Mark was wonderful. We did international freelancing for 10 years.
Wow.
He'd find clients and I would write whatever they wanted. But this particular one, he had a book lined up for the Dummies series, Comparative Religion for Dummies. And the guy fell through. And he was dealing with me with novels.
Okay.
And so he said, oh, I got to find somebody who can do nonfiction religious history. And I said, well, I don't know you'll believe this, Mark, but that happens to be my avocation other than the other stuff. And I was able to write it off the top of my head.
Wow.
And we turned it in. They didn't like it. They didn't like the approach. Nothing wrong with the wording. They didn't like the approach. That book called One God just came out.
Okay. All right. That's a big circle.
The Dummies book,
Yeah.
on the other hand, is completely different. It's written for dummies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it came out in 2007 or 2008.
Okay.
It's considered one of the 100 books by the world's largest online library that everybody should have in their library.
Well,
which I think is kind of nice.
It
hasn't reflected anything in sales. It just reflects nice in status.
Well, when if you're in this business, those are two different scales.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm not in it. I was never in it to make money, and I do a lot of pro bono work. In fact, one of my persons I work with in South Africa, we just got her book accepted by a publisher.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, so, look, if you're not looking to make money, you pick the right profession.
No question. My wife's a teacher, so the two of us have the lowest professions. I'm in journalism. She was in teaching.
Nice. Okay. Well, all right. So let's get into your books, and I want to talk about the writing process. And you're very interesting because A, you've been writing for a while. B, some of your books, like the For Dummy books, have an incredibly broad audience. And C, you write both fiction and nonfiction in a particular genre. So I wanted to kind of dig into your writing process. And is it the same? Is it different when you're writing, nonfiction versus fiction and that kind of stuff? So I want to kind of get into that conversation with you.
Sure. I decided I wanted to be a writer when I was 7 years old.
Wow.
My father was looking at a newspaper. I was looking at it. I wasn't reading it. I was looking at it at 7. And I saw names. And he told me those are the names of the writers of the stories. And I thought, what a great idea. So that's all I ever wanted to do. But I had to teach myself how to write.
Okay.
And that's the same process I use now for everything, which is just sit down at a typewriter, start writing, and then go back and rewrite as needed to make more sense. I'm doing that now in a novel that I've been working on for 2 years now. I didn't like where I was, put it aside, come back to it. I don't do outlines. To me, that's a double work.
Yeah.
If I write an outline, then I have to write it again. You actually do the work. So I would rather, they call it pantsing, but I'd just rather just sit there and start working and see where it goes. With the nonfiction books, because they're all in religious history, mostly religious history, they're really straightforward. Nonfiction is you have to start someplace and you have to end up here and you're explaining something to somebody. So, for example, in the Dummies book, I'm starting with Abraham. Well, where does Abraham take you? Well, it takes you to 3 separate religions, and each one then follows in path. So for me, the outline was unnecessary. I don't outline when I did journalism. I worked for newspapers and magazines and things. I never outlined.
I find that amazing. We were talking and I had naively said, well, I write nonfiction too. And when I do nonfiction, I outline, but when I do fiction, I don't. And you're like, nope, it's not.
I don't want to duplicate.
How do you keep
Basically,
track of it in your head, though? I mean, how do you guide the explanation in an interesting way? You know, when you have to hit historical points and you have to make sure you get everything right.
I'm really not prepared to tell you how it's done. I just know I do it. Okay. Everything just kind of snaps into place. I have an extraordinarily broad background in religious history and world history. And so what I can do is just simply slot things in. And of course, then I can draw on different things. I had a great privilege of meeting 3 very top religious historians. Each one had done a certain section of history. And I asked one of them a question outside that area and they had no idea. Literally no idea. Yeah. And that's what happens. I don't have that limitation. So right now I'm doing a book that's set in Elizabethan England. I don't need to spend a lot of time researching it. It's all here.
Wow.
And I can just simply go ahead. I did look up some of the vocabulary to make sure that it's at least somewhat correct in that regard. It can't be Shakespearean. Nobody would understand it. Right. But it needs to be similar, and the food they're eating has to be correct and things of that nature. But beyond that, I don't need to do anything like that. And I know where the story is going in the sense that it starts here, but the characters take you in different directions and I just go wherever they go.
It's true. And I've talked to a lot of people about that. And before I started writing, I didn't understand. I would hear that. I didn't understand it. I don't know how to describe that to someone who hasn't been through that writing process where, you know, the characters are alive and if you have good characters, you drop them into the situation and they tell you what the story is and you discover it when they do. That, you know, and by the way, the process you're describing, I was thinking back to 2nd grade. I think they used to call that gifted and talented. I don't know. All I know
I'm
is
not prepared. That's for somebody else to decide. I am definitely able to do it. Whether that's gifted and talented is somebody else's. They have to read the book and they can tell me if it's gifted and talented.
Right. You're being modest, but all I remember is those kids on Mondays, they got to go like to the fair or something. And the rest of us had to sit and you know, we'd throw rocks at the school bus when they came back, that kind of stuff. But
I didn't have that. No, thank you. We only had 2. We had a college level, college prep, and we had regular. I was in regular because my twin brother was in college prep and they wouldn't put us in the same thing. So I didn't go on any of these bus trips or anything of that nature. Whether they were there or not, I don't know. I just never went.
Okay. Well, fair enough. But whatever it was, you've picked it up. So when you're doing, do you just write one book at a time or will you have multiple books going?
I have multiple books going simultaneously. Also books I'm helping people. I do a lot of pro bono work. People, I'm on different websites and somebody say, I need to find an editor. And how much does it cost? And I'll write, I don't charge. Oh, wow. And some people think I'm somehow scamming them. So they don't, they think it's a scam. No, I just don't see it. I don't need the money. I want to help people. That's all. I mean, I've been doing this. I'm 72. I've been doing this for 65 years. I'm quite willing to help anybody who needs the help. And sometimes it works great, but if you don't like it, there's no money lost. It didn't cost you anything. I've given you my advice and my comments. If you don't like it, fine.
Well, you know what, Bill? I'm going to put a link to your website. I was going to put it below this video anyway. I'll put it there, and it sounded like if people have made it this far in, they have to earn it. They got to listen, but if they made it this far in, maybe they'll reach out to you. It sounds like a pretty good deal.
I'll be more than happy to. I do one at a time. I can't because that's only fair to the person I'm working with. But at this point, I've done, I think, 5 books for people. Sometimes you have to rewrite from scratch because they have no idea what they're doing. Sometimes, fortunately, it just requires some editing. I had one. It's a wonderful story. I don't know. I hope he got it published. It's about a guy who was in the porn industry, but his job was to look at porn films that are foreign and put the English words in. It's hysterical. It really is funny. And where do I say ooh and ah, and he's got to do all this and work it out. It's really very funny, and I think it's a true story. I think that he really did this.
That's a bit of a walk around the block from religious studies, I would think.
Yes, it is. I had another friend who, for whatever reason, writes pornography and sent me one of his stories, but it's not pornographic; it's erotic. Okay. So I didn't mind helping him with that. I don't want to do pornographic.
I won't ask you to define the difference because I don't want to know.
It's not graphic.
So do you ever get stuck? I mean, do you write multiple books because you'll kind of go through the process with one and then you want to put it aside and go to the other? Is that why you do that, or is that?
Well, it is, and also because I have too many ideas.
Okay.
I just have a list of ideas, and what I do is, if an idea comes for a story, I'm doing something, I'll just put it in the back of my mind. And if it stays and it keeps festering and it keeps coming up, then I go ahead and do it. And so you were talking about, I've had 23 books now published. I have another 25 or so to go. and they're all different. There is no correlate. I don't have a Stephen King approach or a Rowling approach or whatever. It's whatever comes to mind. Some are fantasy, some are murder mysteries, comic murder mysteries. I can't do anything without comedy. There's comic murder mysteries. I did a series, and I'm working on one now, of a fellow who thinks he's James Bond. And so
I saw that. Yeah.
He interferes with these murders in small town, because he thinks he's James Bond looking for the international type thing. He quotes from the movies, and he causes utter chaos.
I saw you've got two of those, right? Is that two?
Three.
Oh, you got a third one? Okay.
I didn't expect to, because it sounds like a one-trick pony, one story. It's really not James Bond type of thing. Yeah. But then another idea came, and another idea came, and now I'm on the fourth one.
Oh wow, that's fascinating. That's fun. That's really fun. Now, do you write?
I have a great time with them. They're big jokes. I mean, I have fun with them.
Now, are you writing for
solve the murder though?
Are you writing for yourself? Is that the theory here?
No, I mean, when I started writing, the idea was for somebody to read it.
Yeah.
So it's not, I mean, yes, your first audience is yourself, but when you really are writing, you're writing for an outer audience. So I have to be, I mean, there can't be inside jokes, for example.
Right.
And I can't assume that somebody read book one is going to read book two. So book two has to stand on its own, and book one has to stand on its own. So it's written for an audience.
And your process is roughly the same, independent of genre, or whether it's fiction, nonfiction, and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just had an idea about a guy who thought he was changing history through his dreams. So I started to write it and realized that, there had to be some sort of story element to it. And all of a sudden he started doing things and so on in the story that were not only very funny, telling he didn't want a particular neighbor living in that house because the neighbor was so annoying. So he meets the neighbor in his dream and tells him how terrible the place is so that he won't rent a room there, and so on. And he, all this stuff that he's doing.
That's
and
fantastic. Yeah.
It really is a lot of fun. I mean, if I don't enjoy it, the reader's not going to enjoy it.
Right. Absolutely. So has your writing process changed or evolved over the years? Do you do things differently now, maybe than you would have done, 20 years ago or so?
Hopefully better. What I used to think was good writing, I've decided really probably wasn't. I've written over 100 novels. I started in 1976, and I've been writing 2 or 3 novels a year since, or nonfiction books since then. Yeah. And I multiplied it out, and it's over 100. Wow. But of that, I don't think 40 or 50, the first ones I did, were worth anything. I mean, they're just unreadable, and I don't even know where they are anymore. They're still up here, but they're just absolutely awful. And things that I thought were good, now that I go back and look at, whether I have from different files and so on, no, this is really poor. Yeah. The first book I did that was actually good was Nostradamus. And that was in the 1980s.
Well, I'm still in the unreadable phase of my writing career. So maybe 50 books, when I hit the 50 book, I'm getting close. When I hit the 50 book mark, maybe I can evolve out of that. So when you write, are you first draft, second draft, third draft done kind of style? Or?
No, Mark Twain used to write each book from scratch 14 times.
Wow.
Minimum, every from scratch. And remember, he didn't have a typewriter or anything. He's doing it by hand.
Yeah.
In my particular case, I will go back to the beginning, start over, and rewrite up to where, and then that'll get me into the tone, into the style that I'm using. And because I don't use one style, so it depends. That's one thing I can tell you is different. And in fact, when I worked for a newspaper in New Haven, they were going to do an entire advertising campaign over the fact that I didn't write in one style. So I could write a column or a magazine or a news story, or I could write a feature story. They didn't have anybody else on the staff who could do that.
Wow.
And I did. And I didn't think it was anything special. It's just that when I first started writing, I was doing everything newspaper style because that's what I read in the newspapers. That's what I had learned. And when I got to college, my first professor gave me a D on the first paper. She said it was newspaper and it's very enthusiastic, but it's not an English essay. So I had to learn the differences between that, because in high school, they just cared that you were writing something and they didn't really care the style and how you approached it. Yeah. But in college, it made a difference. So I learned to do that. So I've worked in radio, TV, I've worked in advertising, I've done public relations, I've done magazines, newspapers. I can shift from all of those, and I can use that in the book, depending on what the style of the book.
Wow. So when you sit down to write, do you write on a word count? I mean, do you try and bang out 2,000, 3,000 words, or do you write
I just write until I'm either tired or I'm just, the inspiration just ran out and said, no, I'm going to stop. So I don't have any content.
On a typical day,
I got so used to writing in between classes in between work when I was doing things that, when I feel the need, I'm retired now. If I feel the need, I just sit down and start writing. If I don't, then I don't. It's as simple as that.
So how long would a typical writing session be? An hour, 2 hours?
I don't know. I've gone all day and
Wow.
not realized the time. My wife has come to me and said, you've been there 8 hours. I have not, totally unaware of the time has passed. Sometimes it'll be 15 or 20 minutes and just like, this is not working.
Yeah.
And I'll just stop. And other times, as I said, it'll go on for hours. I don't really keep a track of that. And besides, there are things to do at the house. We have 2 dogs. You probably heard them barking.
Oh, yeah.
In the background. There are 2 little dogs that bark all the time, but they need to go out. They need to be fed. Things need to be done. And I need to stop what I'm doing, or my wife needs some help with something. I need to stop what I'm doing.
So let's go back. So of the many book, I think you just had a book come out today, right? One God.
We had a book. I think it's out today. I honestly, they sent me the cover and they sent me the galley of it for proofing, and I've sent that all back and so on. I'm assuming it's out today. If not, it'll be out later this week.
Wow.
It's called One God.
Yeah.
This is a book that I wrote when I did the Dummies series book. I wrote an original draft, which I can write the religious history off the top of my head. When you're doing for 65 years, it's really not that hard to do. Particularly, you're not doing the detail type work you do if you're doing a scientific study or that type of thing. And so I wrote it, and my Mark turned it in, and they rejected it because it wasn't in the format and style they want. Yeah. So I had to do it from scratch. But I had this book, and it's been sitting there since 2008. And I went back through it, and I said, this is very different from the one that was published. It's got a lot more material and a totally different approach. Why not? So I sent it out, and publisher said, yeah, let's do it. So
that's cool.
So it's coming out now.
So we don't know. So One God's just coming out, but of all the books you put out, is there anyone that its reception surprised you? Good, bad? More people bought it, less people bought it, just anything that was more of a surprise?
I mean, to be honest with you, none of my books have been bestsellers. I have a dear friend who traveled around the world, and she called me Shakespeare. She loved the books. She said, but nobody will ever buy them. They require you to think. Yeah. And she said, people aren't going to think. But Nostradamus got the best reception I ever got from any publishers. I had people tell me this is the best book they ever read, major publishers, but they weren't going to do it because it didn't fit what they thought people wanted to buy now. They don't want books with plots, they told me. And I have these wonderful rejection letters. This is as good as anything. I said, well, what about Catch-22? What about 100 Years of Solitude? And I actually had a major publisher tell me that would not be published today.
Wow.
Because they don't fit into what people, or what they think people want to read. And I said, well, then I'm in good company.
Yeah.
But it's been published twice, but by smaller places. And anybody who has read the book has told me it's fantastic. But how do you get people to read and to know it's there? It's a completely unique, it's the unauthorized biography of Nostradamus, who's been dead for 500 years. So the mere thought of having an unauthorized biography of somebody who's been dead for 500 years tells you the genre of the book. It's satire, it's fun, it's full of puns and plays on words, and I just had a ball.
That's great.
I didn't want to stop.
At least they send you rejection letters. My rejection letters say, thank you, we've received your package. So
no, I actually, because this is how I got an agent. Mark read the book and said it was the best book he had ever seen. He'd been an agent for years. Right. And he said, but he got all these rejection letters from people. And he shared them, of course, and was like, I don't know what to do. He said, I don't know what to do. This is the best book that he has ever read. And he's really frustrated that he couldn't, but he got 2 smaller publishers to do it.
It's a quirky market. I don't even really understand it on some level, but so Bill, we got to wrap it up, but what advice would you have, for someone? And I want you to give a couple different pieces of advice. I want you to give a piece of advice for someone who thinks they have a book in them, but they haven't started that process yet. And then I want you to give a piece of advice for maybe someone who's written a couple of books, but is looking to improve the process. Like you said, kind of go through that transition from writing stuff that you think might be good, but you go back and look at it and you're like, maybe, to getting, I don't want to say commercialized, because you just said, that's not the right term, but to refining that process, what advice do you have for maybe people in either one of those situations?
If you're just starting, you have to write. And then you need to share it with somebody you trust, whose judgment you trust.
There you go.
Because you're going to look at it and say, I like it or I don't like it, but your judgment isn't what counts. I don't look at something and say that I write and say, oh, that's good. That's not for me to decide. That's for the reader to decide. So I try and find people to read sections of it. I have a dear friend who's a former newspaper editor, and he reads everything I do and tells me, this is not working or this works. He's the one who did the erotic book. And so on. So that I have somebody I can turn to look at and say, what do you think of this? How do you think it's going? That sort of thing. And he would say, no, this is not working, or yeah, this works, and here's why. So find somebody like that. Yep. If you've done a couple books, now you need to have, besides doing that, you need to stand right. You need to build on what you did and say, look, this worked. I like it. Let me see how I can continue on, and read somebody whose work you like.
Right.
You look through and you find somebody you like. They taught us to write supposedly in school by reading, let's say, a Faulkner or Hemingway and looking at that. I could never learn that way, ever. I don't want to copy. We actually were supposed to copy the sentences that they did. And I said, I'm not doing that. I need to do it myself and then find out how it works and so on. Right. When I got to college, the English teacher gave me a D, said, don't pay anybody to publish your books. I had never written a book then.
That's a good rule, though.
But it is, and you still see people online. This is a scam.
Yeah, it is.
Because if you pay somebody, what is the incentive for them to make money on your book? The answer is none. They made money on you.
On you, right?
So that's not it. I know people want to self-publish. That's fine. You can do that. It's free. But don't go through some of these companies that want to charge you for the privilege of doing your book. And I have followed that. I swore to I would never do that, and I never have.
I think that's fantastic advice. And I've actually talked. There's two things if you're self-publishing, I think that you do have to pay for. One is an editor, unless they come to you now. Maybe they don't have to pay for the editor now.
No, they don't.
And the other is $65 to copyright it for real at the USPTO. I mean, because if it has any kind of success, you're going to want to have an actual copyright, not just have put it in the book, because you can't enforce it if you just put the word copyright in the book. But beyond that, yeah, don't go somewhere where they're trying to monetize you, because I try not to use the word scam. You're right, and I agree with it. I try and just say it's really probably not the right approach, I mean, because it's
not a scam. They really will produce the book.
Right.
The problem is they will have no interest in the book. I did this for a friend of mine. I've been working with him for years, educational related books, and I did a textbook for him. He wanted it for religious school teachers. I explained to him that the teachers have no say in the matter. It's the hierarchy that have a say in the books they're using. Do not aim it at the teachers. He said, I'm going to do it. He paid somebody to print it. He sold 0 copies because there is no audience that way. But the material was perfectly fine. It just, that was not going to work. Yeah. And I've tried to, you try as much as possible to help people with that regard, to understand you need to find your audience, and then you need to find a publisher or person who deals with that audience. You want to self-publish, definitely get it copyrighted and so on. But I don't want to self-publish because I want to vet it. I want somebody to actually look at it and say, no, this doesn't work. This does work.
Right.
They are smaller presses. I understand that, but there's a lot of them. And they're willing to work with you. And I do science fiction, I do murder mysteries, I do religious histories. I've dealt with up to now 8 publishers.
Wow.
Because depending on the genre.
Yeah. No, and that's right. And that's the difference. It's hard when you first wade into the industry to be able to distinguish between a legitimate small publisher and something that looks too good to be true, but you got to give them your credit card.
Right.
And that's it. That's the day they ask you for your credit card is the day it's probably not the right.
That's true with agents as well. I've had agents ask
Fair
me
enough.
Everything. You want to pay for stamps, you want to pay for this and so on. And I said, I will one time. But then they send it up. Well, we're sending more out. No.
No.
You don't understand. It's a one time. I will help you cover some of those costs, but you're not just going to send me a bill every month. That doesn't work that way.
Yep. All right. Well, Bill, it's been fantastic talking to you. I didn't realize we were nearly neighbors when we started this, but that's great. I'll put a link to your stuff below this, and then I'll stay in touch with you. Maybe you get a couple, you've done 100, maybe when you hit 150 or something, we can talk again. And
I don't think I got enough time for that, but I know there's another 25 already done.
All right.
And I'm still doing 2 right now.
Great. Well, we'll follow up and we'll stay in contact, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching. Please consider hitting the subscribe button.